Hi, everybody. I'm going to stand, because that's how I like to do it, I guess. So this story is called The Ugly Couple. I first encountered the ugly couple about 5 years ago when I was living in Chicago, although I didn't realize what really happened until many years later. I was riding the bus, a long bus ride from the job I had at the time, a job that I resented for being necessary. I had my purse on the seat next to me because I used to be the type of person who would put my purse on the seat next to me as opposed to holding it in my lap. I surely carried a scowl smeared across my face, as was my custom at the time. The ugly couple boarded the bus at Grace Street. Now, when I say ugly, I mean as ugly as the day you were born, as ugly as sin itself, as ugly as a toad, or in this case, two toads. Their ugliness made them ageless. They were 17 or 29, somewhere in the range of something. She, the ugly she had long, stringy, dirty blonde hair, looking as if it would be less dirty blonde if she actually washed it. The strands stuck together, clumping, covered in something I dared not guess what. Her long, stringy hair reached down to her shoulders, which were enveloped in a large, furry monstrosity of a coat. If I had known then to call her a hipster, I would have done so with disdain. My eyes had been tracking the tacky coat, but then they beamed back up to her face. Her face. Her nose was large and knobbly, managing to be swollen and bony all at the same time. A rather large pimple or a rather small wart adorned the tip, reminding me of that reindeer that nobody wanted until he could get them out of a jam. Her face was covered in red splotches. Pockmarked was the word I used when I described it later to my boyfriend at the time, he who also scowled and put his bag on the seat next to him. The ugly she had eyes, of course, but they were too close together, huddled and holding each other under the umbrella of her eyebrows, singular. My eyes flickered down to her mouth, a mouth that a child would badly draw onto a fish, wide, lippy, and cold. Her teeth weren't the sort of color I approved of, nor the shape I would have preferred. Funny thing about that mouth, though. The corners of her gargantuan flapper were turned up towards her eyes and her bulbous nose. A smile on the ugly she's face. The source of her smile boarded the bus behind her. He. The ugly he seemed younger than she did, but he was just as ugly. As ugly as a sinful toad on the day it was born. He was slightly gawky, with the look of a tall person who was ashamed to be so. He slouched slightly to avoid bumping up against the straps hanging from the bus's innards. His neck disappeared into his shoulders, giving him the look of a sickly vulture. Now, my compassion at the time extended no further than myself, so when I looked at his face, I saw disgust. His mostly black skin was peppered with splotches of white, like a reverse Dalmatian. In my age, I now see a pigment disorder, a skin disorder of some kind, but at the time, I could see only disfigurement. His blotted Rorschach face was peppered with acne, which covered black and white skin with no bias. His large, insecty eyes dominated his face, but they were focused only on the she. My silent, snide description of the ugly couple made me chortle as they walked by me and took a seat a few rows back. "Thank God I'll never be that ugly," I said. On the outside, anyway. They whispered to each other for a little, and then she laid her head on his shoulder, and they rode on in a serene silence. A full, rounding silence, not the empty kind that I always tried so desperately to fill. My attempts to fill loud silences on buses, sitting next to my he at the time, were extremely loud and void of content. I always carried this delusion, though, that to strangers on buses, I was so incredibly clever, They would go home to their spouses and say, "I sat near the most incredible girl today." She sat next to a he, and they talked very loudly without looking at each other. How wonderful they must be. I carried that delusion at the time. I don't know the destination of the ugly couple. I departed the bus at my stop and slumped home. I detailed the encounter later to my boyfriend at the time, and we laughed at their ugliness and scoffed at their brazenness to venture out into the public to expose the rest of us to their hideous exteriors. We could never be that ugly, we laughed. On the outside. Months later, as the winter started to thaw, I remained just as frozen and miserable. My purse firmly planted on the seat next to me, my scowl becoming a permanent fixture on my face. I was walking this time on the west side of town where Fullerton and Austin come together, past a small park. My pace was fast and my head was down like a linebacker. I heard laughter, a sour sound, the laughter of other people. I looked up and I was amazed to see the ugly couple. They were just as ugly as I had remembered, and just as happy. They held hands and smiled at each other, the personification of the melting winter into spring. They moved past me, their ugliness shining in the sunlight, their ugliness, the thing they couldn't see on each other. They were daringly indifferent to my judgments. My opinion on their faces had no bearing on their day. Why didn't I feel like that? Why did I and my he at the time, we were so fixated on criticizing other people, other humans we didn't even know or speak to? It took a few more years for me to realize that I had only known an ugly love and an ugly way to be in the world. I still sit on buses. I hold my purse in my lap now. I keep my eyes open. I turn the sides of my mouth up. And I think about the ugly couple and how beautiful they were at the time. Thank you.